Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to, this is going to be an interesting discussion. When I was a kid, I believed in all the powers of the mind. I wasn't so much on magic. I mean, just literal magic, like making your wand by picking the wood of a dogwood tree at midnight, whatever. I knew that was horse shit. But unfortunately, I wasn't smart enough to figure out the rest of it. Everybody in the 1970s, when I was a kid, everybody believed that there were powers of the mind. And when I say everybody, I mean even atheists, like Gene Roddenberry wrote Star Trek. Spock still had this mind reading ability. Later generations, Deanna Troy, she has this telepathic empathy kind of a thing going on. And a lot of otherwise rational people still thought that there were these psionic abilities that humans could possess, and not just humans. But I remember being a kid, I was reading about animal telepathy too, and I was so into that. I believed in it so much. And the two biggest of the psionic abilities, of course, were telekinesis, but I could never make anything move. I mean, I remember being as a little kid, I'd put some very lightweight object precariously on the edge of a table and just focus all my energy on it like this, and it wouldn't, because I'm an idiot kid, 10 or 11 years old, doing something stupid. Because the grown-ups in my world were telling me that if you believe hard enough, then you can make it happen. Well, the telepathy thing eventually fell apart when I realized that there's no way to transmit, there's no way to receive. If there was, then there would be devices that would be able to pick up these signals. But what do I know? And then some friends shared with me links to, let's call them studies, although I think that's inappropriately polite. Some friends sent me some links to a handful of, we'll say, studies that were not submitted to peer review. So far as I know, I wasn't able to find any peer reviewed literature on it. They were just, these are just recordings that were being publicized via YouTube. And they supposedly show these people having aptitude, and special people in particular, like people who don't have strong verbal skills. Maybe they're adapting some other ways, according to these demonstrations. I think is probably the, or performances, maybe, whatever it is that they're doing. And these people uh, who are very excited about this, just as I would have been, once upon a time. And in fact, if it was true, I'd still be all about that. I mean, this would be huge, right? But my thought is that if it was real, then it would be done in peer review. It'd be done by everybody, and there'd be all kinds of results that we'd be able to measure, and then it would be massive news, not just a handful of videos on YouTube. So I knew that if I spent all the time to watch all of these tapes, that I don't have that kind of time, and I don't, nor do I have the expertise to understand really what I would be seeing if I did all of that. So I reached out to somebody who I knew had expressed interest in this sort of thing before, and someone who has the competence and the wherewithal to understand what we're talking about. So, Dr. Chris Thompson, you are a neuroscientist. If there are any more specific description of your accolades, please give that now. But thank you very much for taking an interest in it and helping out with this, because I want to know the truth of the matter, honestly.
Yeah, Arn, thanks again for having me on. Once again. And yeah, so this is what we're talking about are called the telepathy tapes. You're right that they have a YouTube channel. Um, just a little bit of clarification. Most of their material is just in podcast form. So you can listen to, I think they've got 10 episodes in their first season. Apparently they got a second season coming on. This is a project that is put together by someone named Kai Dickens. It's very slick. It is very well done. Um, Kai Dickens, which I don't quite know her background. I think that she may be some sort of video journalist or just a journalist of some kind. Um, she portrays herself as someone who is like skeptical but open-minded, especially initially in the beginning of the telepathy tapes. Um, and yeah, so I know a bit about this now just because, well, when you reached out to me a little while ago, I ended up listening to just about the whole thing, and so I don't want to thank you for that. I actually want to tell you I'm here to yell at you. 'Cause- no, but it's getting a lot of press. It's something that's been picked up in a lot of places. You won't be too surprised to hear that Joe Rogan talked about it very favorably a few weeks ago. Yeah,
Well,
and
of
there
course he did.
of course, but, with someone who gets, like, millions of views and every single thing that he puts out and, tens of millions of listens to all of his productions, that's unfortunate, and he's pushing out, like, this very sort of very slick, but clearly flawed, series of things. So, okay, so going back to the telepathy tapes. Like I said, it's very slick. It's mostly in this podcast form. Kai Dickens, as she's portraying herself as like a skeptic, right? Like, I don't really know what's going on. I am open minded. I am here just trying to learn about this thing, and people are talking about this, so let's just learn about this. So she brings on a number of characters that have been in this community for quite some time in the ESP related community. One of these is someone named Dr. Diane Powell. So some of the misinformation that's pushed uh, into the podcast is that when she's introduced, she's talked about as she's a medical doctor first of all, right? She's a psychiatrist. I believe that's right. She might not just be a psychologist, but I think she's a psychiatrist. I'm pretty sure she's a psychiatrist. She had an MD. She talks about how she lost her license because she had written a book. Let me just make sure I get it right. The ESP Enigma, published in I think the 90s, and so the establishment didn't want her talking about ESP, so she lost her license. The truth is though that if you can look in publicly available information about this. She did lose her license, but it was because of a lot of complaints about that she was taking like inadequate notes on patients, that instead of meeting patients face to face, she was just talking to them over the phone. There were a number of other things. Let's see, I got to check my notes here. Poor management of therapeutic boundaries, incomplete chart notes, a disorganized approach to treatment, a failure to respond to significant patient symptoms, and concerns over her management of patient medications. Those were the complaints. And she lost her license, but then she got it back, right? Like many people will lose licenses. There, even bad doctors can somehow get their license back though, and so she was actually granted her license back, and so she's licensed to practice medicine in Oregon, although her current status just shows as lapsed, so who knows if she's actually practicing medicine or whatever.
Hmm.
So anyway, so this is one person who's been in this field for some time, and so she's involved with, I forget the name of the institute, but there's some goofy neuro psycho type institute that is intended to focus on meditation and woo quantum entanglement. They'll talk about these kinds of things as being the underlying source of ESP type powers. So okay, that's kind of this person's background. In recent years, there's been an effort to, well, of course, okay, backing up a little bit. When you were talking about these special people, most of who we're talking about are people that are likely autistic or have been diagnosed autistic, or at the very least have some very severe nonverbal communication disorders, right? So they cannot communicate verbally, so or have very limited capacity for verbal communication. There's obviously, it's a sort of a tragic situation that makes these individuals to be sort of tragic characters in many ways. Um, and for many families, obviously, that can be a huge burden for them to have to take care of someone like this for the entirety of their lives, right? Um, and so, wouldn't it be nice to know that they actually are special, touched individuals who have the capacity to tap into the underlying energy that exists throughout the universe, and that they can do things like read people's minds, that they can do telekinesis. These are some of the claims that are made in the podcast. That they can communicate with heaven. That there's sort of like this chat room that exists up in the ether where all of these they call them spellers. They meet, and they meet on what they call the hill, where they can communicate with each other and have this sort of dialogue that happens remotely. Um, and
Yeah, so this is why I didn't wanna watch the thing. I watched little bits from a handful of different videos,
yes,
and what I saw of the little snippets that I was, checking the midsection of this video or check some random point in this one, and what I was seeing was a lot of stuff that wasn't related
mhm.
to telepathy. There's no theory, which is one
No,
thing that really bothers me. If you wanna
yes,
understand how something works, you come up with a theoretical construct
right,
and begin testing it. You don't just assert communicating with heaven.
mhm. That's the
So
idea.
so now we've assumed that there's soul, and by the way, for anybody that hasn't seen, Dr. Chris Thompson did a video with me once before on the neuroscience of the soul.
Right.
So there is no soul. There's no mind-body dualism, there's
Nope.
no separate consciousness. Somebody in the chat a moment ago said, "Is consciousness outside the body possible?" No, it is not. Yeah, they
Not at
said
this
it
point.
is,
Yeah.
but you have
Yes.
to show reasons why it would be, and there is no reason why it would be. There's only reasons that there's the constructs that people were coming up with to try to explain that, there's counter arguments and evidence against that.
Exactly.
So exactly where you would expect to find what if this was true, we find the opposite instead. So that's where that is. So I heard bits about, if I remember correctly, that somebody was like looking at an aurora borealis, or that somebody was interviewing Lucille Ball about some random thing,
Oh,
but
yes.
none of it none of it fit what I would think any scientist would do if you're studying telepathy. And somebody else, well, I've got a comment, I should read it right now. Darrow Kane says, "What do you think of the CIA trying to make, I guess, psychics, or try to mind control people back in the Cold War? I wonder how close they got to something." There was a lot of urban legends and such going around, and the U.S. military took interest in some of it to see if there was anything there. Ultimately, where UFOs, there's apparently a thing to UFOs. There's substance to that. But, I think it was was it Project
Well,
Blue Book, or I can't remember what they called it when they were trying to establish whether there was any truth to telepathic phenomena, and they eventually concluded that no, there is not. And
right.
if there was, we'd know.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's not like something that would be a secret that only would be available
Yeah.
to the CIA. Yeah, no, and the CIA was also very interested in remote viewing, which is again something that is talked about in the telepathy tapes. This is the concept that you can just sit and sort of meditate, I guess, or have some sort of out of body experience where you could then view what's happening in another room or on another continent, or say happening in Vladimir Putin's chambers, so you can get the secret codes, and that obviously is where the CIA would be very interested. Yeah, it's bogus. I mean, obviously, and the CIA found that out pretty quickly. But like you said, I mean, there was a lot of interest in telepathy in the 70s and the 80s. Like this was a real hot topic. I remember this stuff too when I was growing up in the 80s. And also sort of believing in and like, oh, that this might be true. And it was something that was pretty widely, I wouldn't say accepted, but it was almost taken for granted that like, sure, there must be something bigger than that, and that, like, I there were all kinds of charlatans around at that time. Yuri Geller is one that I'm thinking of, who was famously debunked by the amazing Randy. um a lot of other sort of woo specialists through the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. You had people that, like what's her name? Sydney Brown, Samantha Brown. Her last name is Brown, but people who convene with the dead, like they'll come in and do cold readings. This is all sort of the same thing. And except that it's sadder in some ways because it involves a debunked technique that had been developed and obviously could have some promise, but unfortunately, there's just not enough evidence that it seems to work, and that in fact that it leads to, um, well, some organizations refer to it as abuse of these people, these
Yeah,
people
some
who are
people are saying
nonverbal.
Sylvia Brown was the name you were
Sylvia
looking
Brown,
for.
that's it. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Yes. So, okay, the technique that I'm talking about is called facilitated communication. So this was a technique Some of it was developed by a professor at Syracuse at some point in like the early 2000s. The idea was that, okay, if these people are nonverbal, but maybe they can communicate through other techniques. Facilitated communication is this idea that if you have a trusted person who is there providing support to the person, emotional support, but also apparently physical support, literally holding their hands while they use a keyboard or pushing their arms along so that they can use a keyboard, that then they can communicate.
Are we
Aaron, do you
talking
see a
about
problem with
the
this?
human as the stylus in a Ouija board?
It's kind of the same. Yes, that's basically what I'm talking about. So, except that you have this, very sad case of someone who's very nonverbal doing the communicating, supposedly, but you have another human sitting there holding their arm while they are using the keyboard or
I've seen the
touching
same
touch.
technique used so that an elephant can paint beautiful pictures of a person holding a
Yes,
flower.
right.
And
It's so
all of it is it just from the perspective that we're where the viewpoint, you can't or where you're standing to see, you can't see the way the person is guiding the trunk of this elephant as he's painting.
yes. This is the thing, and that's obviously exactly what's happening. So this is essentially ventriloquism, right? They're ventriloquists using the arms of these people to communicate their own thoughts, and so this has been debunked over and over and over again. Number of studies have shown that facilitated communication,
Can we
holding
talk
their
about that for a moment?
yes,
Because
sure,
there are people who and I perfectly understand this. I mean, I have bought into some things that I really wanted to be true that would be exciting and amazing if they really were true, and I was hugely disappointed to find out that they were not, but I needed to know that they were not.
right.
Some things it should be that simply not having enough positive evidence should be enough to dissuade you, but that is not always the case. Sometimes you need that evidence against it too.
Yes, that's true.
So
Absolutely,
so
yes.
what do you have?
So, okay, already a number of studies have shown that facilitated communication is flawed, that it was something that was rife with abuse, that the people doing it were clearly just using this supposed technique of letting this nonverbal person communicate, creating the communication for that person, right? And so there are a number of organizations that see this as a way of abuse and refer to it as like human rights violations, actually. The so they thought, okay, well, let's solve the problem now. Like we if the problem is they're sitting there holding their arm, maybe that's the problem. So then they switched over to something called rapid prompting methods. This is the thing that you probably saw in the videos. Okay, so that they weren't doing facilitated communication in the telepathy tapes because that's been largely debunked and largely been left set aside. What they're doing now is rapid prompting methods, and the most common form of this is called spelling to communicate, or S2C is often how it's referred to. Basically, in this case, you are holding some sort of board, like a little plastic board that might have a number of letters or numbers on it, and the speller, that's how they refer to the nonverbal communicative people, has their finger out or some sort of pencil, and the facilitator holds the board. So they're not touching them. Although one thing that's been seen in many of the videos in the telepathy tapes is that the facilitators often are touching them, which is a problem because one thing that you can do for prompting is that if a person is sort of waving their finger around, all you have to do is just like a little subtle movement or a little subtle touch that could allow the person to settle on that finger. Okay, the telepathy that they're talking about is that the facilitator, oftentimes it was like a mother or a parent, um holding the board, and then the non-communicative person is got their finger out. The mother is given the, like, say a three-digit number or some word or something like that, and then but doesn't say it to the non-communicative person, the speller. Then they do the thing, and then all of a sudden the non-communicative speller, this comes up with the three-digit number or the word. Can you see the problem there?
I've played with the Ouija board when I was a
Yes,
kid.
it's the same thing.
Yeah, I was at a table full of adults. I mean, I was the only child there, but I also felt like the only sober person.
Right.
Yeah, because when you've got multiple sets of hands on, I think the
Yes.
thing is called a stylus, or I don't know
I
what they
forget what
call
they
it.
call it. Yeah,
Yeah,
but I think
what
it's
they
a
call it in
stylus.
the middle of a Ouija board. But, you're not supposed to be directing. Everybody's consciously trying not to direct it, but, you between the 2 of you, you're directing it.
Yes,
Now,
exactly.
one person can sit there and hold their hand still, but 2 people on the same thing, when they know that it's supposed to be moving some way, and that if it's not moving at all, then nothing's happening and there's no more fun, then it's surprising how you can get messages, intelligible messages.
Yes, yes, and that's likely what's happening here. So you've got this person who the facilitator. So this would be like the mother holding the board in front of this poor kid, given the 3-digit number, and then like obviously that person can communicate that very subtly with small movements of the board itself while the person has their finger up or other things that they can use to communicate that information. They say that it only works if the facilitator is holding the board. The other thing that they talk about in the telepathy tapes, it's not shown in any of the videos. So one of these kids, it only works with the mother, but it doesn't work with the father. So it's all of this like little subtle nuance where what I would say as the skeptic, it's pretty obvious that the mother is either consciously or subconsciously prompting the child to come up with the right word, right? And that it obviously that's the link because if you take anyone else, including the child's father, it doesn't work. The other thing is that okay, there's there's the podcast. It's just a lot of talking about the stuff that is happening, right? Kai Dickens talking about the narrative. They have a little bit of evidence that they talk about, and they will have audio, but they had cameras in there the whole time. They have not made it publicly available all of that footage. Okay, they have. You can go to their website and pay $9.99 to get access to the videos. I haven't done this myself and the reason why I thought about it, but I read another article that already had gone through and debunked all this. So this is great article. Hopefully, I will provide you a link to this article so that you can
Thank you.
really, really just an excellent breakdown of why
By
the
the end of this show, if you would, give me
yeah,
that so I can put it in the
for
description.
sure. Yes, absolutely. So it's McGill University in Canada has a science communication um, office, and they've got a couple of people there that do a great job of sticking up for good science and debunking pseudoscience. And so this is an excellent article debunking the whole telepathy tapes. They went ahead and got access to the videos.
Ah,
Oh come on, look at this doggy.
I don't know
I'm
why he
wanting to
just decided
communicate.
to explode there.
So, and well, we'll get to dogs actually. So, they, the videos are not much more than what's already publicly available. So they really don't have like too much for you to actually observe, but they do see that there are certain things that look like prompting. Like for instance, one of the kids, her name is Mia. The mother is often touching Mia while she's doing the facilitated communication, like touching her forehead or touching her chin. This has been known that as a link for facilitated communication to prompt the kid to get the right answer, right? By shifting their head slightly so that their gaze falls upon the right answer, right? So this appears like that already is problematic. There's a little bit of video of another kid who and that's in the trailer for the telepathy tapes who's using a some sort of iPad thing where he seems to get the right answer of a 3-digit number that the mother comes up with by multiplying two random 2-digit numbers. And but it happens to just be 900. So that's interesting that that kid can do that. But I would want to see the whole footage, and there's not that's not available, right? And so the other thing is like I could easily imagine because these people are so credulous, right? They're wanting to believe in this. You've got this one woman who's written an ESP book, right? Dr. Diane Powell. Kai Dickens, she's pretending to be this skeptic, but she really isn't. You can tell by the end, she is just buying all of this bullshit. Um, the stuff about the kids meeting on the hill, talking to heaven, that telekinesis is possible. They have a whole episode about animal telepathy as well. So they talk about, I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Rupert Sheldrake, who is I guess a scientist, a psychologist in the UK, but he thought that he had found these telepathic dogs who were able to sense when their owners are coming home. And so this one dog in particular, I forget the name of this dog, but it's a very famous case. Had a very sort of cute little, looks like a little terrier type dog. There's all kinds of video of this dog. Where and he'd done some studies, like he went 4 times and watched the owner coming home, and apparently the dog was there at the window waiting for the owner to come home. Okay. Uh that was his report. Oh, interesting. Fine. Let's go evaluate it with someone who's a little bit more skeptical, because Rupert Sheldrake believes in this idea that there's this underlying energy that permeates through the universe, that somehow we can tap into that energy. And that obviously must be the way that this is being facilitated. And it
And is
involves
this
quantum.
energy measured in kilowatts,
Oh,
ohms,
you know the answer to
calories,
that. They don't
newtons?
measure it. There's no measuring. It involves quantum stuff, right? You got to include a couple of quantum things. But we're not measuring any of it. Of course not. I know that's one of the things that's so frustrating, is that when people are pushing woo like this, they'll use the words like force and energy. Only know of so many different kinds of energy. So just give us which kind it is, right? Like, it should be somewhat measurable if we're talking about energy, right? We should
Yep.
have some way of detecting it using instrumentation. And just give us a mechanism. But of course, no, there's no mechanism. So another guy named Richard Wiseman, he's also a psychologist in the UK. I believe he's at Cambridge. He wrote a great book called Paranormality, whole book debunking uh, um, all different aspects of the paranormal and psychic babble and woo and ESP stuff. He went and also did a very thorough study of this dog, and happened to see that the dog just frequently would go over to the window, often for all kinds of different reasons. Sometimes it would be noises that were outside, but the dog was often going to the window, as many dogs do when their owner isn't at home, right? Like, I want to see my owner, but it didn't correlate distinctly with the owner coming home. And there was just no clear correlation whatsoever. And it's because the dog, obviously, if you do it enough times, you can find um, some pattern that may look like that there is uh, um, a relationship, that the dog at the window when the owner comes home. Wow, every time I come home, the dog is already there at the window. But if the dog goes to the window dozens of times when you've been gone for a couple of hours, well, the dog is frequently going to be at the window when you come home. Like, that's just
Yep.
a fact. So
I
that's
so
basically what
wish.
was happening there. And but the thing is, there's a whole episode in the telepathy tapes about animal telepathy, and this is the main story that they talk about, and they don't talk about any of the debunking. They interview Rupert Sheldrake, even though this was all resolved in the I think he did his stuff in the late 80s, and Richard Wiseman went back to see this dog in the early 90s. So this is like old stuff, and there's a whole episode on it about animal telepathy and in the telepathy tapes.
I
So
so
it's
wish that
yes.
animal telepathy was a thing because I mean when I take my Great Pyrenees out for a walk, I mean I'm on a podcast, right? And see he suddenly has to go straight to DEFCON 5 because he heard a bird outside. So he's going to bark as loud as he can right here in the room with this microphone. And there's nothing I can do about it. Then he's going to have to charge the door when the mailman shows up because he can't figure out that a mailman's going to be here every day. And then when I take him for walks, if a vehicle comes down the road that is loud and scares him, he will try to attack it. So he's gonna charge an oncoming delivery truck going 40 miles an hour. He's gonna attack that head on, and the only reason he's alive is because he's at the end of my leash, and I weigh slightly more than he does. I so wish that telepathy was a thing so that my dog could understand how everything he does is dumb,
Sure.
and
Yes,
how if he just
exactly.
stopped doing the dumb stuff, I would still love him.
Right. We all feel that way about our pets. We love our pets. And it's not to say that there can't be special connections with pets. Obviously, that's the case. Pets have an enormous capacity for communication. Obviously, right? They will
Yeah.
communicate to us in the way that pets do.
I
But
wish
that's
my dog could
it's
understand the reason that I can't take him to outdoor dining restaurants like my wife takes her dog everywhere. It's
Mhm,
because her dog doesn't act like a jerk if he sees another dog.
exactly. And if
My
you
dog will bark his ass off until we get thrown out.
and if you could only communicate telepathically to your poor little
Yes.
dog, that would solve that problem. But it just isn't gonna happen. So yeah, like the basically but this whole series, like I said, it's really slick. They're looking to do a documentary. I think that that was pretty clear that they have a bunch of footage and they want to put together as some sort of documentary. And that part of doing this as a podcast is to probably gather more footage so that or get money so that they can do more footage and get more kids doing this kind of thing with the spelling and I don't know, I don't the whole thing, it really leaves a bad taste in my mouth because like these are kids who you know obviously incredibly sympathetic, right? Like you feel very bad for anyone who has to struggle with a neurotypical communication
Yeah.
problems or any kind of problem like this, and it feels like they're being uh used in this case. And I don't want to say that the parents are doing it on purpose per se. It's hard to see that it isn't,
Well, it's look
but
at the
it
way
could simply just be subconsciously as well.
that's what I'm thinking it is. When
Right.
we did the Ouija board when I was a kid,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I am trying to be as neutral as I possibly can be, but I know that, I can't just hold my hands frozen. They have to move some way, right? Or the thing doesn't work. So I have to relax and let the flow. But when you got two people doing that, you're going to direct somewhere, even if neither of you consciously does it.
Exactly.
Now, when you've got a family and they have this neurotypical kid who is it's a special challenge that they have there's things they have to do that that other families don't, so there's a little bit extra burden, a little bit more stress there.
Mhm.
So is there more impetus to believe that they're able to communicate, which they so desperately want to do? And if I want to communicate with my dog, I could just imagine if it was my son,
Yes. Right.
right? I mean,
Exactly.
so of
You
course
could
they get
imagine
that.
the emotional need to have that kind of communication.
But
And
then I've
just
also seen how people do exorcisms as total scams,
Mhm,
but the people there absolutely believe it and not dishonestly.
mhm. Yeah.
We know that the exorcist is being completely dishonest, but we can see how the people watching this have utterly bought into it. They're completely duped. They don't know that they're duped. They think that this is a legitimate experience and that we should see that as proof if we were to be there with them.
Exactly.
You know,
Yes.
I
And
feel for people
this is
being
the
manipulated
same.
like this. And look at faith healers. You can go into a place where you have a legitimate illness, but when they tell you you don't because you've just been healed of it, for a lot of illnesses, you will think for the moment that you really are healed. And so there have been people that would throw their whole prescription out on the floor of some church because they don't need it anymore. And James Randi himself told me this story, and I think he did this on video too, so you can see it on video as well. But he told me this thing where he wanted to follow up on one of these people that did that, where they just threw out their prescriptions because they don't need them anymore. So when he finds where this person lives at long last, interviewing all these other people at the church, he finds out who this person is, and they go to visit. And he said when he showed up, they were carrying her body out on a gurney. So that's what we're looking at. And
Yeah.
this is how I have to treat claims like this. If it was real, there'd be oh so many ways to know. And it wouldn't just be that the people who have this ability are the ones who also cannot communicate. Just like in the 70s when we heard all these outrageous claims, it was always somebody in a faraway land, maybe on the other side of the Iron Curtain. There was never a way to verify it.
Mhm.
And you always have to have these kind of scams always have to have that protection.
Yes, that's totally exactly right. And the so there I don't quite understand how there's this industry built around it. Obviously, there are people like these doctors that I guess they believe in this, that there's this. I mean, this is what they say. These are the people that are coming up with the idea that there's this underlying energy that permeates the universe, that there's something special to consciousness. A lot of this obviously is related into new age wooism and the
Well, look how we just had, I think was is her name Paula White? I think that is this
yeah,
speaking in tongues lady who is
that's
now
right.
employed by the U.S. government as a spiritual
That's
advisor.
right, she's running the Faith Defense Office or something like that, yes,
Yeah.
and she's there up there speaking in tongues. Oh, come on, how does that work? Even if it does work, you have to at least tell us what actually is happening there, and of course, you know this probably just as well as anyone else, but that when they look at that speaking in tongues, they're never using phonemes, which are the sounds that are specific to a given language or, like, the sounds that a language uses. Um, they never use phonemes that are outside of their native language, right? So there are certain phonemes that, say, Mandarin has that would be very hard for a non-native speaker like me, myself, being an English native speaker, and I don't know a lick of Mandarin, for me to actually pronounce the way a native speaker would be able to do. Those
Yeah,
phonemes
I've had
are
some difficulty
inaccessible to me,
with
right?
Vietnamese too. My wife
Mhm.
laughs at me when I try to pronounce Vietnamese words.
Yeah, it's same thing, right? So, but they find that these people that are supposedly have the Holy Spirit in them and they're speaking in tongues, they never use phonemes out of their native language. They just can't. And it's because, obviously you've got the neurological circuitry built for language. You can spit out a bunch of gibberish, right? Like if you want to get your brain going and you want to put on a good show for a big group of
Yeah, I
people
know a
on
girl
stage. Yeah.
who is an atheist, but before she was, back when she was still a believing Christian, she said she taught herself how to speak in tongues so that her evangelical father would be proud of her when they go to church.
Yeah. There's a lot of pressure to do these kinds of things.
So she was a believer at the time and knowing that she's doing a stunt,
Yes.
that it's just a performance, that it's not real. And if it was, if speaking in tongues was real, wouldn't it just be that everybody speaks the same language,
You would
right?
think, right? Because
Wouldn't
it's
it be
supposedly
that at
like the
least
language of like Jesus, right? Isn't that what they
wouldn't it
say?
be that at least 2 people in some congregation somewhere, at least one time, 2 people were able to have a conversation in that
I
language?
I know.
Does not everybody know that that shit isn't real, but they believe it anyway?
Right.
And that's how we get grown ass adults appointing Paula White to be a spiritual advisor after watching all the shit she does.
Exactly. Yes. Interesting times we're living in. And I
Yeah.
think I mean it really does, and you've got people like RFK Jr. going in to run the Department of Health and Human Services.
Yeah, let's not go all the way down there. Let's stay on the
But
topic that we're
honestly,
on.
I think that you're going to see probably federal support for stuff like this. Because like they are part of the same sort of collection. Like RK Jr. definitely is part of that new age woo. Um I mean I don't know what his position is on ESP or
Yeah.
whatever,
I remember you remember the
but it's
beginning
consistent
of
enough.
Ghostbusters, the
Mhm.
early scenes of Ghostbusters. They're doing psychic
Yes,
tests,
I love
right?
that. See,
And that's basically telepathy. I mean, the guy can see the picture, and then the other person has to describe what the pic. This is the way. I know that's a TV show, but you would still have demonstrations like that where that sort of thing would be possible. It would be if someone who can communicate verbally,
Mhm.
who would be able to give these descriptions. And it would be I always say that if magic was real, then you would have people like Spock and Hermione and Gandalf and Obi-Wan who would be able to demonstrate that
Mhm.
reliably,
Right.
you know, to the point that even if science can't explain it, they still have to admit that it's there.
Mhm.
That every time Gandalf wants the stick to light up, the stick lights up.
Right. It have to be somewhat consistent, right? Exactly. The in the telepathy tapes, they acknowledge that the fact that like people who are verbal are don't seem to have this ability. So they spend a lot of time talking about this. They in fact so a lot of it is just kind of theorizing and coming up with ideas. None of it based in reality, but the one of the ideas that they come up with is that these nonverbal spellers is what they call them, is that the reason why they have this ability is because it might be that language is the thing that holds us back from tapping into this telepathy like power. And that's why we only see it amongst the,
In
more
nonverbal people and in
nonverbal.
dogs,
Yes, right.
that because they can't communicate well enough for us to debunk the whole thing right away.
Yes, that's exactly right.
I'm
Yeah.
holding a card. I can see that it's got 3 wavy lines. What am I looking at? And they'll say a horse. Well, okay, well that's done.
That's right. Exactly. Yes. That's
Okay,
exactly
well,
right.
do you have anything? I know that you didn't you buy a book?
I did. Paranormality, the one that I mentioned by Richard Wiseman.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I
Good.
I made it through it. It's great. That's another thing that I would recommend. It didn't have anything specific to the telepathy tapes because it was written in the mid 2000s, I believe. But it's a great book. Richard Wiseman does some really great work. He also has a really great YouTube channel where he got interested in psychology because as a kid he was a magician, a lot like James Randi, right? So he was interested in magic and was actually pretty heavily involved as like a teenager. But then like he got more and more interested in like how is it that I'm able to make people believe things that aren't true? And so when instead of sticking with magic, he went to university and studied psychology. And so he is, one of the world's experts on the science of believing in things that aren't true.
That's
And
an
so
embarrassing thing for me.
yes.
My father lived in Las Vegas, and he went to go see Doug Henning,
Okay.
magician,
Yeah.
back in around '82, and my dad came back and said, "I don't care what religion you are. You got enough sense. If you got enough sense to wipe your own ass, you can't be no atheist." And he said that because he saw Doug Henning and he believed that that was real magic.
Yes.
And all I can do is remind myself that I have believed some really stupid shit in my time.
In the evangelical community, there are these magicians that go, yeah, on the circuit, doing the same thing. Fooling, I mean, 'cause obviously they're fooling people. We know that it's not real, but they will pretend that it is real, and yeah,
All
and
right.
that's
Well, I
how you
want to
can.
thank you for that. I got one other
Sure.
comment that came up here. This is
Great.
Sissy Guru 2000 said, "Could evolution produce a biological form of radio communication among organisms of at least the same species?" Well, if you have a means of transmitting a signal, you might also have a means of receiving that signal. But and it wouldn't even necessarily have to be within the same species. But the thing is, with all of these telepathy things, there's no signal. It's not
Yes.
like there's some mysterious energy that can't be measured. There's
We
there's no
we also had a
indication.
yeah, we had a conversation related to this, and um, so I would recommend the commenter to take a look at your archive because we remember we talked about again, it was related to telepathy, but it was the idea that you can read the activity of another person's brain. And this you had some commenter that was harassing you and pointing at these studies that seemed to prove that that was the case. And it's true that you can read the activity of a brain, but you have to be really, 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 really close because there is a radio signal that can be detected at the surface of the brain. That's how we do EEG, right? An electroencephalogram is detecting that subtle change that can happen with neural activity as neurons fire and as they don't fire. The thing is, you can't detect that farther than a couple of inches away. You have to be really, really close, and you have to have sensitive electrodes that are right close up to the scalp in order to detect that. Because there is the R squared law, the signal gets diminished in an exponential way the farther away you get. So if you're super close to the scalp and you're using the conductivity that can happen at the scalp, you are picking up that electrophysiological change. The farther away you get, especially if you are doing it through air, which is not a very good conductive medium as compared to, say, the scalp,
And see, this is why Spock has to
and
put
you
his
can't do
fingers
it.
in your face.
Yeah, you're right. You got to touch. Exactly.
All right, Dr. Thompson, I sincerely thank you for taking part in this. I was very surprised when I asked you to look into it, and I knew I was making a big ask for the hours of video that I don't have time to go through, that you would be willing to do that. That's huge. And then when you
That
told
was
me that you were gonna go a step
yeah.
further and you were gonna buy this book
Mhm.
and you're really seriously doing the research on this, I'm
I
thank
would
you.
have told you no if I didn't think that it was something that one, I that it was kind of related to some of my interests, and two, if I didn't think that it was going to be worthwhile and interesting, I'm glad that I did because like that it was getting a lot of press and it has gotten a lot of press. And I like to keep up on these things but it wasn't something that I like fully understood. So it got me an opportunity to read about um how some of this stuff gets debunked. Because
I am wishing
I'll
that
be honest.
I am wishing that I watched more of those videos though, because like all I
Yeah.
remember is each little snippet that I watched was irrelevant and nonsensical.
It because all those videos are almost composed as trailers, and it jumps around an awful lot, and they're not terribly informative. I have not seen the footage that's behind the paywall. But like I said, this article, they looked at it and they said that there's not much more than what's already publicly available anyway.
Yeah, behind the
And yeah,
paywall.
behind a paywall, yes, because
Yeah,
they keep saying like, "Oh, if you want the real footage,
not
pay
peer review.
$10." No, none of this is peer reviewed for sure. Yes, absolutely.
Whereas, can we just get a straight up? I mean, if this was real, if you're a scientist and you believe for that this could be real, you'd be doing real experiments on it, and if you showed anything at all of potential, you'd publish.
Oh,
Am I
for
right?
sure. I mean, this would be huge if you could show this scientifically. Absolutely. Yes.
Yep. You'd be
Right.
famous.
Yes. Except that they're using essentially the next stage in a debunked communication form that most of the augmented accessibility and communication organizations say is a form of mistreatment. And, because it's rife with problems and abuse.
Speaking of which, Anton Gomez says, I got a question. If telepathy was real, how would one hide messages from unwanted telepaths? Would it be possible to make interference pattern without multiple senders? Well, the tinfoil haberdashery is is where you want to go.
That's right. Exactly. So the tinfoil hat, that's the best method that I can think of.
Yeah, I wish I had seen more of the videos just so that we could talk a little bit about how
Yeah, you
irrelevant
didn't
and
miss
nonsense.
anything,
Yeah,
honestly. There's not that much out there anyway. And it's I mean, we'll see. Like if there's more stuff that they have in season 2, perhaps I'll follow it up and I might bug you again and say, "Hey, Aaron, you really got to check this out cuz here's
if
something
there's
that they
any
really think."
substance to it, I'd be happy to look into that. Yeah, but I as people have already figured out, when it's something that's outside of
Mhm.
my realm, I want to talk to the experts.
Yeah,
So
I appreciate
thanks
that.
again, sir.
Of course. Yeah.
All right, where can we find you? You have the last minute of the show.
Great.
Tell everybody who you are,
Yeah.
what you got.
So, I didn't do the thorough introduction that I sometimes do at the beginning because I wanted to just jump right into the topic. But I'm a professor at Virginia Tech of neuroscience. But I do on YouTube all kinds of debates and videos related to neuroscience. I do debates in neuroscience, but I also will often debate on creationism. I also did a recent debate on fluoridation, fluoridation of the water. That was on Modern Day Debates a couple of months back, and I also debated Kent Hovind a couple of weeks ago. That was a nightmare. But I that's on my channel. You should check it out because he gets trounced. I feel like, and it was actually really embarrassing for him. I mean, he doesn't do a great job anyway, but in most of his debates, especially as he's getting older, and after you've heard him say the same thing 100 times in all the debates. But this was a debate that was specifically on did the carnivores evolve, and I got him to have to take the phylogeny challenge. Like I didn't say that's what we were doing, but I forced him to take the phylogeny challenge, which is entirely based on your description of how that works. and it was glorious. And it eventually just left him completely flustered. It was a lot of fun. So I would encourage anyone to check that out.
Outstanding. I've gotta
Yeah,
see that now.
yeah, please.
All right.
All
Thank
righty,
you very much, Dr.
for
Chris
sure.
Thompson.
Yep.